He sat at the end of the mess hall counter, coffee cooling beside a folded cap as the flag rope clinked outside. The curator mocked the backward dial on his Sherman model, saying rules were rules and history didn't bend for sentiment. He just turned the canteen cup light, catching its rim the same quiet shine that once marked where mercy took aim. Quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back. The museum garage woke before the town did. Light slid through dusty windows, cutting pale stripes across the concrete floor. The air smelled faintly of oil, brass polish, and yesterday's coffee. Somewhere near the door, an old radio murmured the morning news, its signal swimming in static, until a calm announcer's voice broke through Memorial Day, the morning of remembrance. At the far workbench stood a man in a faded denim shirt, a retired gunner, his hair the color of powdered steel. His name, Hayden Cole, still sat stitched on a threadbare patch over his pocket. In front of him, a scale model of his old Sherman tank rested under the glow of a single lamp. He picked up a wrench and leaned close to the turret sight. The screw turned with a soft click backwards against the direction printed in the manual. The sound was small, deliberate, almost a whisper. From behind, a voice carried across the floor. "Morning, Hayden. You're here early again." It was the museum director, clipboard in hand coat, still unbuttoned from the chill. "Couldn't sleep," Hayden said. The sight was off. Off. The director frowned. "You've got the dial turned the wrong way." "Maybe," Hayden answered, keeping his eyes on the scope. "Maybe that's how it really worked." The director stepped closer, peering at the model as if it might confess something. "Visitors'll notice. They'll think it's a mistake. Then maybe they'll ask why," Hayden replied. The man's tone was calm, the kind of calm that carried weight. The director hesitated, then marked a note on his clipboard and left the garage door creaking open behind him. Hayden exhaled, letting the echo settle. He ran a cloth along the edge of the turret, tracing the line where paint met metal. The radio hummed softly, marching drums fading under a preacher's prayer. He looked at the dial again. To anyone else it was just a detail reversed, but he remembered the feel of the real thing, the recoil, the shudder through his shoulder, the orders shouted through smoke. He remembered how turning it the wrong way had once been the only way to survive. He adjusted the wrench a final time, the motion slow, respectful. Dust swirled in the sunlight like faint ghosts of exhaust. A boy's voice drifted from the hall, one of the volunteers sweeping the main room. "Mr. Cole, you going to have the tank ready for the ceremony?" "She's already ready," he said without looking up. The boy laughed and disappeared again. Hayden set the wrench down the metal, ringing against the bench like a muted bell. He paused. The radio shifted to a local broadcast, names of fallen soldiers read one by one. His hand rested on the turret. For a moment he bowed his head, not in mourning exactly, but in careful balance between gratitude and guilt. Outside, the morning brightened. A flag cracked faintly in the wind beyond the open door. He straightened, checked the alignment through the tiny glass sight, and nodded once. Maybe no one would understand why the dial faced the way it did. Maybe it would look wrong forever. But the truth, he thought, rarely pointed forward first. He reached for the wrench again, fingers steady, despite the tremor age had lent him, and turned the bolt another quarter-inch. The sound echoed once in the quiet shop. He kept tightening. The office smelled of polish and paper, the kind that made old rooms feel preserved more than lived in. Files stood like soldiers behind glass. A wall clock ticked loud enough to divide the silence into equal parts obedience and regret. Hayden Cole sat across from the museum director, hat in his lap. Between them lay a report stamped Compliance Review. "We have to follow regulation," Hayden, the director, began. "Displays must be historically accurate. Visitors expect that." "Accuracy isn't the same as truth," Hayden said quietly. The director lifted his eyes. "It's still a museum, not a confession booth." A draft slipped through the window, stirring the pile of memos on the desk. The sound of papers fluttering filled the room like restless wings. Hayden looked at the folder, then reached inside his coat pocket. His hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from weight. He laid down a folded fragment of blueprint, yellowed at the edges. Across the paper, pencil lines mapped the sight alignment of a Sherman gun mount. In the corner, a red circle surrounded a backward arrow. "That's not regulation," the director said flatly. "No," Hayden agreed. It's what saved us." The clock ticked louder. Somewhere overhead, the ceiling fan turned with the slow rhythm of forgotten propellers. "You're telling me," the director continued, "you actually reversed the sight during combat?" "I'm saying the book said turn right. The battlefield said turn left." The man sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You can't display that. People will think we got it wrong. They'll question the design, the manuals, the engineers." "Maybe they should," Hayden said, voice even. "A rule that never bends breaks people instead." He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. His words hung there fragile but immovable. The director stood pacing behind the desk. "You know how donors are about optics. They want heroism, not mistakes." "Then call it an act of maintenance," Hayden said. "We were keeping the truth from rusting." The clock struck the half hour. Its echo filled the narrow space like an order given and obeyed. The director returned to his chair. "Look, you're a veteran. You know procedure. You can't just rewrite it now." Hayden studied the fan spinning above them. Each blade sliced the air with the precision of memory. Pinned by procedure, he thought. Not by the enemy, not even by fear, just by the weight of someone else's checklist. He folded the blueprint once more, tracing the crease along that red arrow. "All right," he said finally. "If you can't show it, don't. I'll keep it in the drawer with the things we weren't supposed to know." He rose from his chair, the leather groaning softly beneath him. Hayden, the director, said, his voice softer now. "You know I respect what you did out there. But this isn't about disrespect. It's about consistency." "Consistency is how we lost half the squad," Hayden murmured. He turned toward the door. The fan hummed above, slow and steady. "You really think turning a dial backward could make that kind of difference?" the director asked. "I don't think," Hayden replied, resting his hand on the doorknob. "I remember." For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the sound of things left unsaid. The papers on the desk fluttered again as if stirred by the past. Outside, someone called his name down the hallway, but he didn't answer. He looked once at the blueprint still lying open, the backward arrow catching a shaft of light. Then he left the office, the ticking clock fading behind him. He didn't argue. The workshop smelled of coffee and varnish, a mix that made the old garage feel like a memory you could breathe. Sunlight caught the floating dust and turned it to gold. The air was busy with soft voices, young volunteers sorting boxes of spare parts and labeling the displays for the upcoming Memorial Day exhibit. "Mr. Cole, where do you want this?" Hayden looked up from the workbench. A girl of 16 balanced a small wooden placard that read, "Fire Control System, Model M4A3 Sherman." "Right here," he said, "beside the blueprint." The blueprint lay under glass, its pencil lines faint, its edges worn like a map that had been folded too many times. Beside it sat a tiny sight dial, half-polished, tilted slightly backwards. "Was this the piece you told us about?" another volunteer asked. "The one that wasn't supposed to work." "It worked fine," Hayden said, pouring himself a cup from the thermos. "Just not the way they drew it." Laughter drifted across the room. Someone turned up the radio, an old swing tune, cheerful but slow. The kids gathered closer, notebooks open, ready to learn a little geometry that had once kept men alive. Hayden picked up a bit of chalk and drew 2 lines across the concrete floor, meeting at an invisible point. "Now imagine these are your guns. They're supposed to meet out there about 1,000 feet ahead." He marked the far spot with a rag on the ground. "But out there," he said, tapping the floor, "you can't see anything. Smoke, glare, fear, it's all noise." So we brought the meeting point closer. Not for disobedience, but for mercy. One of the boys squinted. "You mean you broke orders for accuracy?" "We bent them for mercy," Hayden replied, smiling faintly. "Big difference." The room went quiet for a beat. Only the hiss of the coffee pot and the scratch of pencils filled the space. The smallest volunteer, a boy with oversized glasses, read the tag on Hayden's shirt. "You were a gunner, right?" "Still am," Hayden said softly. "Once you learn to see straight, you never stop." The word gunner hung there a moment before the others repeated it in unison, not with awe, but with affection. The gunner. Their laughter returned lighter this time, almost musical. Hayden set down the chalk and lifted the sight dial, turning it between his fingers so the light caught the reversed numbers. His hand trembled the way old hands do when they remember both weight and loss. He steadied it against the bench until the tremor passed. "You ever think the rules were wrong?" one girl asked quietly. "Sometimes," he said. "But wrong rules make honest people. You have to see for yourself where the truth hits." The volunteers nodded, some pretending to understand, some actually did. One of them wrote the quote down on a sticky note and stuck it to the blueprint glass. "See for yourself." Outside the open door, the sound of a flag halyard clinked in the wind. Inside, the coffee steamed between them, and the blueprint gleamed like a map of patience. "So you kept this all these years?" "I kept it because nobody else would," Hayden answered. History forgets the quiet fixes. They began packing up for lunch, still talking, still calling him Gunner as if it were a medal. He smiled without correcting them. He looked at the sight dial once more, its backward angle catching the light just right, like truth seen from the side. He breathed in long and slow. Then he smiled again and let the moment breathe with him. The projector clicked to life with a dry whir. Its light spilled across the museum wall, turning the pale paint into a screen of moving dust. The room was small, warm with the hum of fluorescent bulbs and the faint echo of a hymn from the chapel next door. Hayden Cole stood in front of the camera that Maya, the young filmmaker, had set up. The lens glared at him like an open question. He adjusted his collar eyes, flicking to the blueprint framed behind her, to the shell cap gleaming beneath the glass, its edge etched with the faint words, 300 yards backward. "Ready when you are," Maya said softly. "I've been ready for 80 years, Hayden answered. She smiled, then pressed record. He took a slow breath. Everyone keeps asking why the dial was reversed. The short answer, because it worked. The long answer. He looked down, fingers brushing the cold surface of the shell cap. The long answer starts with what we called the backward setup. He turned toward the light, his shadow falling across the projected smoke on the wall. That backward setup turned our Sherman into what we called a sniper tank, not a weapon, a way to place care exactly where it belonged. It saved my crew. The room went still. The projector hummed louder, and within its beam, light and smoke mingled, forming ghost shapes that moved like memory, but showed no battle, no fire, just the shimmer of pressure and patience. We weren't out there to destroy. Hayden continued, his voice calm. We were out there to protect the men standing next to us. The sight just made sure we could. Maya zoomed in her camera, catching the reflection of the projection across his face, light cutting through the wrinkles like film scratches on history itself. He paused. "They told us to keep to procedure, 1,000-foot alignment, no closer." His jaw tightened. "We tried it their way, lost 2 tanks. Then I thought, what if we bring it closer?" He lifted his eyes, steady but shining. "They said I couldn't change it. Said I'd crack the mount. Said I'd get pinned by regulation." The phrase landed heavy in the air. The SM lock plus pressure moment, no violence, only the sound of paper orders becoming weight on a man's back. But the math didn't care about the memo he said. The math said, closer means life. The hymn next door swelled organ notes soft as breath. "So we turned it back," he said. And when we fired, he stopped, his eyes closing as though the word saved had drained the air around him. Silence stretched. Only the steady rhythm of the projector remained. Then he opened them again, gaze resting on the light itself. "That's how we lived," he said quietly, turning what shouldn't work into what had to. The projection flickered once more before clicking off, leaving a square of bright dust suspended in air. Maya lowered the camera, whispering, "Got it." Hayden nodded. The room fell into the same kind of quiet that comes after truth. The hall smelled of coffee and copy paper, the kind of scent that always seemed to follow meetings where history was about to be rewritten. Rows of folding chairs lined the floor, the kind that squeaked if you breathed wrong. A dozen people from the museum board sat scattered across them, murmuring in the uneasy rhythm of bureaucracy. At the front, the blueprint hung beneath the bright track lights framed next to the shell cap, engraved 300 yards backward. The glass reflected the faces of those debating what to do with it. "It sends the wrong message," one board member said. "It's technically inaccurate," added another. "It's human." Maya cut in from the back, holding a small remote in her hand. The room quieted. Only the click of typewriter keys from the office next door filled the pause. "Mr. Cole's interview," she said, pressing play. The projector flicked to life again, washing the wall in light. Hayden's voice filled the space, Steady, humble recorded truth looping through a cheap speaker. That backward setup turned our Sherman into what we called a sniper tank, not a weapon. A way to place care exactly where it belonged. It saved my crew. The words echoed. Even in the tinny playback, the sincerity carried weight. A man near the back stood up slowly, cane tapping the tile. His gray hair was thinner now, his uniform jacket 2 sizes too large. The name tag read Earl Shorty Griggs. I was one of that crew, he said. His voice cracked, but the conviction in it didn't. That backward setup, I'm alive because of it. No one moved. Even the typewriter stopped. He shuffled forward, eyes on the display case. When you're out there, you don't think about manuals or rules. You think about the man beside you and the space between breaths. Hayden made sure that space was wide enough for us to come home. He rested a trembling hand on the glass. The reflection of his palm overlapped the blueprint's red arrow as if sealing an old wound. If you take this down, he said, you're not protecting history. You're deleting it. Maya watched the board members exchange uncertain glances. The room filled with that quiet that precedes agreement, the kind that builds slow as dawn. The chairman cleared his throat. Let's vote. Hands rose, cautious at first, then unanimous. The display stays. A breath of laughter, a few applause, and then the sound of folding chairs snapping closed as relief spread through the room. At the back, Hayden sat beside the door cap in his hands. He hadn't spoken once. When the clapping started, he simply lowered his gaze. His eyes found the floor, the blueprint, the shell cap under glass, the echo of everything he'd turned backward just to make things right. He smiled small and private, a gesture of gratitude more than pride. The hum of conversation faded. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows soft as an exhale. Then the room fell quiet. The morning light came in soft and golden, spilling over the museum lawn. The crowd was already gathering, neighbors, veterans, families holding paper flags that fluttered whenever the breeze touched them. The air carried the flap of a flag from the pole out front and the distant toll of a church bell marking the hour. It was Memorial Day, the day when memory itself felt alive. Hayden Cole stood a few steps back from the new display cap pressed against his chest. Around him, children whispered questions to their parents, asking what the plaque said, why the man beside it looked both proud and sad at the same time. Maya adjusted the camera on her shoulder. "You ready, Mr. Cole?" He nodded once. His voice didn't need to lead anything anymore. The museum director, the same man who had once told him the display must follow regulation, walked to the microphone. His tie fluttered in the wind, his voice softer than Hayden remembered. Today the director began, "We honor the quiet courage that doesn't always fit in manuals or headlines." He pulled away the cloth covering the plaque. Sunlight caught the engraving, and the metal gleamed like water. To the gunner whose backward setup turned his Sherman into a sniper tank and saved his crew. For a long moment nobody moved. Even the flag on the pole seemed to still as though listening. The radio at the edge of the lawn, left on for background music, slipped into static before fading entirely. The silence that followed felt intentional, sacred. Then the crowd began to clap. A group of school children saluted, tiny hands pressed to their foreheads. One of them whispered, "That's the gunner right there." Hayden smiled barely. He stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. In his palm he held a cloth patch, the faded insignia of his old crew edges, frayed colors softened by decades. He knelt and set it gently beside the plaque, right under the engraved words. "You proud now?" Maya asked from behind the camera, her voice half teasing, half reverent. He looked up at the plaque, then at the children, then back to her. "No," he said, smiling, "just aligned." A gust of wind moved through the crowd, rattling the flag, brushing through the microphones, turning the silence into a low hymn. The bell rang again in the distance. Hayden's hand stayed on the metal a while longer. The letters were cool beneath his fingertips, steady and exact, the same way he'd always tried to be. Around him the world kept moving, voices, laughter, footsteps, heading toward the picnic tables by the park. But he lingered, tracing the groove of his own story, now written in brass. He whispered something the camera barely caught. A single line almost carried away by the wind. Sometimes precision is just love measured in reverse. Maya lowered the lens. The crowd dispersed. The radio came back faintly, the static smoothing into a tune from another century. Hayden turned once toward the flag, then toward the horizon. The morning light hit the plaque again, bright enough to make the engraved words shimmer like a reflection on still water. He nodded once as if confirming the alignment one final time, then walked away slow and certain, leaving the patch and the plaque to speak for him.